Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim V'nasan Lanu Es Taraso Baruch Atah Adonai Nosein HaTorah Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. All right. So we are continuing the book of Ruth. We got up last week to verse 11. We're in the middle.
I did it.
Okay, Beryl, now you can like something.
No, yeah.
We got up to verse 11, and we were explaining that we're in the middle of 3 attempts of Naomi to discourage these 2 daughter-in-laws. Yeah, Bella. These 2 daughter-in-laws, Ruth and Arpa, from continuing with her, from really being part of the Jewish faith.
Agava.
And we said that that's Rachel, yeah. That we said that even if we understand, well, we don't see them because we don't see their faces, so we only see Bella and Rachel and Chava. Everybody else we just see. Yeah, now you see Menucha. So yeah, well, we don't see her face, we just see the black. Yeah, there was
Beryl. Hi, Beryl.
Hi, Bobby.
Hi, Beryl.
Birthday.
You
He's
hear
wishing
me?
you a happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Yeah. Happy you. Happy you, Bobby. Happy you, Bobby.
Happy birthday to you.
He's singing the song. We're catching it. Happy birthday to you, Bubby. Happy birthday to you, Bubby. Okay, we're going back to learning, Beryl. You're far more entertaining, but we came to learn Tyra. We need to learn Tyra. So we're learning Tyra. So we said that we actually learned from Naomi that the potential convert has to be discouraged 3 times, very strongly. Here we're looking at these 2 women, and what they're doing is really incredible. Obviously, Ruth carried through, but what Orpah was doing is also very incredible. They're princesses. Their father's the king. Again, princess in the palace doesn't mean what we think of as a princess and not what we think of as a palace, but still, it still meant something. And they could definitely have gone back to whatever that meant, the palace, and to their homes, and they had homes, and they would have gotten them married. And they were saying, no, we are going to sacrifice it all. We're going to give it all up to stick with this amazing woman, with our mother-in-law. We don't have her sons, but we have her, and she's amazing, and we're sticking with her, and we're sticking with her people. And that was their decision. And each one of them came to that decision. It's a very, very big decision on the most practical level. Their husbands are gone. Naomi doesn't have any more sons to marry them to. Naomi's fairly penniless. So it was a huge thing for both of them to say, we're sticking with you. And Naomi discouraged them once, and they stuck with her. And Naomi discourages her a second time, and they stick with her. And only now, the verse we're up to, verse 12, after Naomi discourages them a 3rd time, does one of them, Orpah, turn back. And Ruth, as we said, the ultimate example of the sincere convert, stayed. And that's how we know that she was always a sincere convert for the past 10 years. As versus Orpah, who was not, though she obviously did a pretty good job here of really, if Naomi hadn't discouraged her a 3rd time, she would have walked that road. She would have walked to Judah. she would have been a convert as well. But we have to discourage until we really come to that point of, is it real or not? What did Orpah have to gain? Nothing that we see. Maybe she just saw in Naomi and in Judaism something higher, something more noble than she ever was exposed to before in the pagan idolatrous culture and the very primitive culture of the Moabites. And maybe she saw it and she sensed it and she appreciated it, but she still wasn't that sincere convert. So she could see it, sense it, appreciate it, recognize it's higher, more authentic, more noble, connecting her to God, but she still wasn't that absolute sincere convert. And that's why in the end, when she was discouraged the third time, she left. Okay, so let's now read this third attempt. Verse 12. Turn back, my daughters, go along, for I am too old to have a husband. Even if I were to say there's hope for me, and even if I were to have a husband tonight, and even bear sons, a lot of evens here. Well, that's the end of verse 12, but let me just continue reading so you understand her point to them. Would you wait for them until they were grown up? Would you tie yourself down for them and not marry anyone else? No, my daughters, I am very embittered on account of you. For the hand of God has gone forth against me. And I'm going to take a little coffee break for a second to deal with this. Okay, and I'm back. So that are her words. Her words are very, very strong. And our basic message to them is like, what are you sticking with me for? What do I have for you? What do you need? You need husbands. You've been married for 10 years. Let's pretend I have no clue. Let's pretend they got married when they were 14. Pretty appropriate for that, age, those years. 13, 14, something along those lines. 12, 15. So what is she? 22, 24, 25? Get married, have kids, have a life. You're going to wait for me? Do I have a husband? And if I had a husband, am I going to get kids? And if I get kids, are they going to be sons? And if they're sons, are you going to wait till they're, however, another 20 years? Like, what are we talking about? I have nothing to offer you. Go home. So that's her very, very, very strong words to them. And this third time, Orpah listened and turned around. Which shows us, because we could say, like, what are our sages saying? You have to discourage a convert 3 times. Come on. If they're sincere, they're sincere. If they're insincere, the first time they would stop. A second time, a third time. Why do you have to do that? But we see this very clearly from this case. That here's Orpah, who officially was willing to give up everything, who was discouraged one time and kept going, who was discouraged a second time and kept going. And only by the third time did she say she's right, and she turned back. All right. So looking at this verse 12. It's a very interesting point here that our sages say, according to some sages, that if a woman has resigned herself to never marry again and never have children, and it's been already 10 years, she's not going to have children. So it's been 10 years since her husband died. This day, the day they're marching off to Israel, is the anniversary of her husband's passing. It's the 10th anniversary. Very, very precise timing. It's the 10th anniversary of his passing. So she was saying, really, if I don't get married tonight, there's no chance. Because I already resigned myself that I wasn't going to have a husband. And if you for 10 years assume you're not going to have a husband, not going to have any more kids, it's not going to happen. Meaning, even if I would have a husband, I for sure my body would not turn the on switch to have children. If I caught it tonight or within the 10 years by this night, maybe. But I don't have any man in my background. I don't have any hopes. There's nothing going on here. So this is all theoretical and pointless, and go home. So some, there's lots of different, many explanations on these verses. So someone brings out, I don't know if this was truly about Naomi, because she was considered very, very righteous, but maybe it's just a lesson for other people that she's sort of saying, maybe it's almost my fault. Listen, my husband passed away 10 years ago. Maybe I could have gotten married over these past 10 years. Could have gone back to Israel and gotten married. But I was always like holding out for something better. I was married to the richest and the most illustrious man around. And maybe I just, this one's not going to be good enough. This one's not going to be good enough. This one's not going to be good enough. No one's going to be good enough for my set of expectations. So what happened? So 10 years later, I don't have anyone. Sort of saying that, like, I always hoped for something better, and therefore I got no one. And sort of implying that sometimes instead of hoping for the better, a person should see what's out there, what they're being given, and understand that also could be quite good. As versus like Naomi saying in her situation where it's been 10 years, I don't think it's not happening. Now, she said to them a very hard phrase to understand, and there's many commentaries on it. I'm embittered because of you. I'm embittered from you. She said, if I get married and if I bore a son, are you gonna wait for him? Are you gonna tie yourself down and not marry anyone else? No, my daughters, I am very embittered on account of you. For the hand of God has gone forth against me. So what does she mean? I'm embittered on the account of you. Why did you, Rus, Arpa, why are they making her bitter? So there's many different ways of understanding those words. So one thing could be very simply is that she was sort of feeling, when I look at you, I do feel bitter because maybe you're the cause of my son's death. Again, this follows the understanding that they were not converted before, or following the other understanding, they were insincere converts. And maybe that's why they were being punished. Also, to put something in here that I don't know if we really discussed before, but it's important to understand in this whole idea of the conversion and the question on the conversion, there's a rule. It says it's in the Torah. It's a biblical law that we cannot accept converts from Moab and Ammon. Not meaning they can't convert. Anyone can convert. Judaism doesn't hold you back. It doesn't make a difference your color, your nationality, nothing. Anybody that's sincere and wants to become part of God's flock is allowed in, if they pass at least 3 dissuasions. But they can't marry another Jew. So if somebody from Moab or Ammon converted, they would only be allowed to marry another convert, or a mom. That's a separate story. But a regular Jewish person, they're not allowed to marry. Why? Because when the Jews came out and they left Egypt, they were very, very, very harsh to us. So expressing this cruelty, we're saying, wow, there's such cruel people. Even if they convert, they can't marry a regular Jew. And that's a rule. And that's biblical. The rule was not really practiced much for a very simple reason. Generally, people from Moab and Ammon weren't looking to convert in the first place. So meaning this was a rule, this is a law, this is a commandment. It's written in the Torah. It's what we call midoraisa. It's biblical. But it wasn't a biblical law that had much practical application, because it wasn't that converts came around too often from Moab and Ammon that you had to say, oh yeah, you could convert, but you're not going to be able to marry a regular Jew. You'll have to marry a convert, which is okay, because obviously you have one soulmate, and your soulmate must be another convert. Because of this, though, and this is where we're coming to in our storyline, because there wasn't much use, and it wasn't used. Any law that's not used much sort of isn't understood as well, because we don't really use it, so we sort of don't understand it. Like nowadays, a very classical example will be all the laws of purity and impurity. If you've ever tried to learn any, as I have, they're incredibly complex. They're mind-boggling complex. It's unbelievable to imagine people living with these set of laws. But we live with lots of complex laws. We live with the complexity of the Sabbath and of kosher, and we live with lots of complex laws. But since we live with them, we understand them. But since the laws of purity and impurity we haven't lived with since the time of the temple, they seem completely unfathomable. So similarly, since we really didn't have converts from Moab and Ammon, which means we didn't really have these situations of converts that therefore have to be reminded that you can't marry a regular Jew and only another convert. So people started getting confused about the law. And people started thinking, and this was the general take, that no convert from Moab and Ammon can you marry. They can convert. They're 100% allowed to convert, but they have to marry another convert. They can't marry a regular Jew. Now, that's not the law. The law is only the men and not the women, because the reason for the law has to do with how the men treated the Jewish people when we were leaving Egypt, and that has nothing to do with the women. They weren't part of it. So therefore, the law doesn't apply to them. But people forgot. Why am I saying this now? So let's think of the situation here. Elimelech, Naomi, and Machlon and Chilion moved to Moab. Elimelech loses his livestock, he loses his possession, he loses his life. Machlon and Chilion are still there. And they marry these two princesses, and we're assuming they converted them. Because if they didn't convert them, we said the rest of the story makes no sense, because if they didn't convert them, the marriage isn't legitimate. And then how is the Megillah calling Naomi Ruth's mother-in-law? How is there the whole concept of Yibum? How is there the concept that she's inheriting or she has possession of Machlon's lands? So it must be that she was converted. At the same time, we see that Naomi tried very hard to discourage both of them from coming with her. And both of them, in a sense, pushing them back to idolatry. Which means we said that Naomi was checking, is it a real conversion? Is it a sincere conversion? Or is it a conversion because this is what your husband wants? Which means ultimately it's not real. Arpa's wasn't real and Ruth's was real. But now let's throw in this other factor that I just explained to you. Even though we know now, Naomi knows that Ruth's conversion was real, she still doesn't know that the marriage between Ruth and her son was kosher. Because people didn't understand that law. And the general misunderstanding on the street, so to speak, is that you're not allowed to marry anyone from Moab or Ammon. Obviously, we're only talking about a convert because you can only marry a Jew. So here we're talking about a sincere convert, a Moabite that's Jewish, an Ammonite that's Jewish. But even though they're 100% Jewish and they're 100% sincere and they're great, wonderful people, you can invite them to your Sabbath table every week. They're your best friends. You can't marry them. Why? Because that's what God said. So Naomi, and seemingly her two sons, and actually almost everyone, thought maybe you're not allowed to marry these Moabite converts. They're converted, they're sincere, they're Jewish. But who says you're allowed to marry them? Maybe they can only marry another convert, which would mean that the marriage of her sons to these girls was still forbidden. So however you slice it here, we're going back to this phrase here where she says, I'm so bitter because of you. So why is she bitter because of them? I mean, they're nice girls. Obviously, they're very nice girls. They could go back and be princesses in the palace, and they're walking with their mother-in-law barefoot in such abject poverty. They must be very special girls. Why is she bitter because of them? So she's saying, maybe my sons died because of you. Maybe that's why they died. Now, that's not why they died. They died because they abandoned Israel. And they went the same route as their father. They lost their livestock, they lost their possessions, they lost their lives, and obviously God punished them, and they were childless for 10 years of marriage. But she didn't know. Even though she sees now that Ruth is sincere, maybe Arpa is sincere at this point. You know, this is her third time pushing them away. So there's lots of ways of understanding this. Maybe my sons died because they married women that were never converted. But we said it doesn't really make sense to think they were never converted. But maybe they married women who converted but they still weren't allowed to marry them. So they were in an illegitimate marriage for the last 10 years. And that's why they lost their lives. I'm not blaming you. You're nice girls. You're wonderful girls. You're so supportive of your mother-in-law. You're amazing girls. But maybe my sons died because of you. And that's why when I'm looking at you, even though it's not your fault, I feel very bitter. I feel in a lot of pain because I think of my sons who lost their lives. And maybe it was because of this marriage. Now, again, the truth is it was not because of the marriage, because the truth is that you are allowed to marry a woman, Moabite or Ammonite who converted, just not a man. But she didn't know. She wasn't sure. And we go back to Machlon and Chilion and we say, what were they thinking? Did they know? How could they have known either? They also didn't know. So in a sense, you could say in a sense their marriage was wrong, though it wasn't wrong. You know what I mean? Like if you would think a food is not kosher and you say, I don't care, I'm going to eat it anyway. In the end of the day, it turns out the food was kosher. But when you ate it, you were in a very defiant mood toward God's laws. I don't care, it's not kosher. What do I care about kosher? I'm going to eat it anyway. Oh, it's dairy and I just ate meat. I don't care. I don't have to be so careful. I'll eat it anyway. Turns out it's not dairy. It's a fake out. It's a parva substitute. But you don't know that. You think it's dairy and you eat it anyway. Did you sin or did you not sin? You ate the food that you thought was not kosher. You didn't care. Truth is it's kosher. But you didn't know. Did you sin or did you not sin? So it's sort of like depending on how you're going to define a sin. Technically, no, because it's kosher, because it's parav. But on another level, in attitude, you sure did. So Machlon and Chilion marrying these women that converted from Moab was not a sin, because you're allowed to marry a Moabite woman convert. But they didn't know that. They converted them. They led Jewish kosher lives for 10 years. But maybe the whole time they did think they were living in a sin, which means technically it was okay, but the attitude was very off. So maybe there really was part of that in terms of why they deserved to die. Maybe it was technically okay, but not so did they know that, and probably they didn't know that, and probably they thought it was not okay, and they did it anyway. So if it's an interesting concept, but if you think something's not okay and you do it anyway, in terms of relationship, it's definitely separating yourself from God, even though technically you might find out later that, or God for sure knows that you're still kosher, but in your mind and in your heart, you're not. So that's the first one of the many explanations we have on why did she look at them and feel so bitter? Maybe you're the reason why my sons died. It's not your fault. It was an arranged marriage. It's their fault. It's not your fault. But maybe you're the reason why. Another way of looking at it, not assuming she thought the marriage was a problem, even though she probably should have thought the marriage was a problem. But even if she didn't think that, she might have thought something else her sons did wrong because of these girls. In other words, they were converted, check. Somehow she knew, and somehow her sons knew that they were allowed to marry Moabite women converts, check. But there's another problem. The problem is they were princesses, right? We've said that many, many times. Their father was the king. His name was Eglon. We even explained why this very cruel, wicked despot deserved that his daughter should be Rus. Remember, he stood up when the prophet came and said he had the word of God message for him, and he stood up. In that merit, he deserved that his daughter would be Rus. But the fact that they were princesses implicated her sons very much. They weren't just women of Moab. They were princesses, which means once my sons married the two of you, they're stuck in Moab forever. I mean, Eglon would never let these two Jewish men take his daughters back to Judah. So what they supposed to do? Divorce them? That would be like treason. You're going to divorce the king's daughter? So once Machlon and Chilion married Rus and Orpah, once they did this, in essence, very wrong act, even though they converted them, following the opinion of the Zohar Chadash that they converted them, which again is only logical and plausible. But even still, and even if we're not going to say the crime was that they thought it was forbidden because you're really not supposed to marry a Moabite convert, though they were allowed to, but they didn't know it. But the very essence fact that they married a princess means they were tying themselves down to Moab forever. Because Eglon would never let his daughters leave, and Eglon would never let them divorce his daughters. So when I look at you, I feel very bitter because not your fault, but you caused my son's death. Because through you, my sons got stuck in Moab. And that must be why God took their lives, which is true. That is why God took their lives. So maybe it also had to do with the marriage. We don't know. We're not God. We don't know. But definitely part of their crime was, if not the entire crime, choosing to stay in Moab. Meaning initially when Elimelech left, he said to his family, I'm leaving. You want to come with me? No problem. You want to stay? No problem. I'm going. And his wife and 2 sons went with him. And they are not initially blamed because their father was going. So, I mean, the wife goes with, the kids go with. They obviously weren't like, 5-year-olds, but still, this is their father. Okay, they weren't blamed. But once Elimelech died, that was supposed to be the critical moment that Machlon and Chilion would say, what are we doing here? Our father lost all his livestock. He lost all his possessions. He lost his life. God has not yet struck us because obviously we're still under our father's authority, but our father's dead. At this point, if we want to just protect ourselves, we better get out of here while we still have our livestock, our possessions, and most importantly, our lives. And what did they do instead? They got married to these 2 Moabite princesses. They tied themselves to Moab forever. And they didn't leave. And in truth, we're told, we don't know if they could have left. I mean, maybe Eglon would have gone after them with an army. What a chutzpah, you're taking my daughters away from me? What a chutzpah, you're divorcing and abandoning my daughters? It's very sticky. You're talking about a very powerful and not probably too sane king, right? So this is so enticing. The king wants to give us his daughters, princesses. This is so cool. This is so cool. This is so cool. This is the road to your destruction. If you had taken regular women, it would have been a half a problem. You took princesses. That's what destroyed them. Because even if over the past 10 years, they had a flicker of a thought in their head, maybe after their livestock died, following the exact same pattern as their father, maybe after they lost all their possessions, they knew what was next was their life. But they didn't leave. How can we leave? We can't leave. How can we leave? Why? Because they married the princesses. So therefore, Naomi is saying, when I look at you, I feel bitter. Because of you, my sons died. It's not your fault. But because of you, they got stuck in Moab. And because they got stuck in Moab, they continued their father's sin. And the same way he died, they died. Which is sort of an interesting concept. Like, we'll be like, why were they so stupid to marry these princesses? To put themselves in the exile of Moab forever. But, sometimes things that are really bad for us are really enticing. It's like, wow, a princess? There were no princesses in Judah, right? There were no princesses because there was no king. A princess, a real princess for us? They think that highly of us, and she'll convert, so she's Jewish, so she's legit. I don't think she's legit. She's a Moabite. It's okay. She's legit enough, and she's a princess. So they sort of got swayed by all the, ooh, you're marrying the king's daughter, you're marrying the princesses, which mess themselves up because they probably thought it was forbidden to marry a Moabite convert. And they messed themselves up because they didn't go back to Israel because of it. How could they? They married the princess. They were stuck. So from both perspectives, the marriage maybe is what killed my sons, or the rejection of Israel by marrying these princesses and being stuck in Moab is what killed my sons. So I look at you, I feel very bitter, which is sort of, again, we could think of a lot of amplifications for ourselves in this idea of sometimes things that are so bad for us, they look so enticing, so pretty, so cool. And if we think about it, it's like, what? That? I'd be harming myself. What do I do that for? But sometimes when you're all the ooh, you don't even think clearly. You can't see it clearly to say this this is horrible. This is poison. This is self-harm, which is what Malchon and Chilion did to themselves. There are other ways of looking at these words. Some say she didn't mean anything like this. She meant, when I look at you and I see your pain, 10 years childless, lost your husband, I feel even worse than I think of my own pain. I'm an old lady. Okay, I suffered, suffering some more. You're young girls. Why do you have to suffer like this? Looking at your pain makes me feel even worse. That's another explanation of this. Lots of different ways of understanding these words. Okay. So these were Naomi's words to Ruth and Orpah. This was her third attempt, which means she knew in her head, if they still stick with me after this, they're legit. She still doesn't know that the marriage was legit. So still maybe her sons died because the marriage was wrong. But she at least knows that her sons were living with Jewish girls for the past 10 years, though maybe Jewish girls they weren't allowed to be married to. This was it. She put in her final third attempt, and it was very intense. Now, of course, Ruth and Orpah don't know the rules. They don't know there's going to be attempt 1 and attempt 2 and attempt 3. And if you stick with her for all 3 attempts, then you're Jewish. They didn't know that. Of course, a real convert shouldn't know that, because if they do, it's sort of like a fake out. But their response was very genuine. So what was their response? So now up to verse 14. They raised up their voices and wept again. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. So both of them cry. And then we see Orpah gives a kiss, and that's the last we hear of Orpah, which means what the prophet doesn't even bother telling us is, and she turned and went back home to the palace. But Ruth wouldn't leave her. Ruth clung to her. Very interesting. You know, you make these decisions. If someone had been watching, if this had been a moment that got caught and was like, plastered all over WhatsApp or YouTube, of that time, so to speak, if there was, people would look and say, Ruth is the insane one and Orpah is very normal. I mean, you see Orpah is a very nice girl, and she didn't want to abandon her old, impoverished mother-in-law of her dead husband, and she was willing to give up her life and her riches to be with her. She's an amazing girl, such a sweet lady. But in the end, she was normal. Her mother-in-law is saying, go, go, go. What are you staying here for? Get married, get kids, have a life. And she listened. She regained her senses. And Ruth was crazy. Ruth just stuck to her. That's what it looks like. Now, if you could step back 4 generations, Ruth and Orpah meet again. But not as Ruth and Orpah, as their descendants. The descendant of Ruth was King David. The descendant of Orpah was Goliath. If you've ever heard of David and Goliath, in the Hebrew, David and Goliath, David's the great-grandson of Ruth, and Goliath is of Orpah. Of course, we didn't know the names. You probably know the famous concept of this, so to speak, little boy. I mean, he wasn't 5 years old. That somehow people make him out to be, but he was not yet of age to be in the army. So he was maybe 12 or 13 or 11 or 10 or something along those lines. I don't know his exact age. I don't remember. I don't know if it's known. He was 13, 14. I don't know. He was not yet a soldier. And with his slingshot, killed that massive giant that was mocking God and mocking the Jews day after day. Who was that massive giant descended from? Orpah. And who was David descended from? Ruth. Which I think is another amazing thought. Because at this moment, I mean, in theory, they were both 2 good girls. 2 very good girls. They were both sticking with their mother-in-law. They both were saying, forget about the palace, forget about the Moabite husband, forget about the kids. We're sticking with you. Life of poverty, here we come. But at a critical moment, Orpah cracked because she wasn't really sincere, and 3 pushings away, and she turned. And that turning away and going back to a easy life in the palace. Obviously, she got remarried and she had kids because Goliath is her descendant. But what did she produce? A Goliath. And Ruth, who embraced her mother-in-law, embracing God, embracing Judaism, and embracing, for all practical purposes, extreme poverty and affliction, she produced David. So I think that's also like an amazing vision. Sometimes these things, when we could picture them, a little bit of good imagination always helps. When you could picture it as like, wow, sometimes we make decisions and it seems like it's crazy. Why are we sacrificing so much for God? Why are we giving up such good stuff that maybe is sort of kosher or is okay to be a little closer to God, to be a little more holy, a little more religious? Like, what difference does it make? What are we doing it for? It doesn't make any sense. So here you see a very insane moment. Rus was not making any sense. I'm saying if this was a Kodak moment and everyone got to look at it on their cell phones, they would say Rus is nuts and Orpah finally got normal. But Orpah had Goliath and Rus had David. So it's really true in our lives as well that sometimes when we choose to do what God is asking, or not even is asking, God doesn't ask you to be a convert. When we choose to go walk the direction of God, it really, and it might not be seen right away. It might take a while. It took a while for us. It took quite a long while, actually. But in the end, from her choice came David. David's her great-grandson.
I feel like if you're really paying attention, you will see that he has your back. Like if you really open your eyes, you'll like, even though, yeah, like that was generations later, I'm pretty sure like closer she saw blessings, you know, like she didn't just.
She didn't only see it when, well, the truth is all of her children were very, very, very righteous. She had a son who was very, very holy, who had a son who was so holy that it says about him, David's father, Yishai, that the only reason he died, our sages say, is from the bite of a snake. The bite of a snake meaning the primordial sin in the Garden of Eden. Because on his own, there was absolutely no reason to ever take away his life. Who had a son called David, who eventually has a descendant called Mashiach. So she didn't have to wait even for David's birth to have Yiddish Naches, to see the fruits of her choice, because her son was very holy and her grandson was very holy. She didn't have to wait for her great-grandson to see that. But I'm saying at that moment, she had no question. She had no qualms. But anyone else looking at her would say she's crazy. But in the long run, she has David and Orpah has Goliath. And you're right. I think it's true for us as well, that when we make those difficult choices, I don't know if our choices are ever going to be as difficult as Ruth's, but she was probably, stronger soul muscles to carry those burdens. But when we make those difficult choices, and we all make choices, and we all make often difficult choices, and we sometimes make crazy choices for God. When we make those choices, it's good to keep this in mind. Ruth made a crazy choice, and she had David, and Orpah was normal, and she had Goliath. So when we're making those choices, like, there's a lot of we can't even understand the ramifications. We can't possibly understand the ramifications of every action we do. By us, because we think of ourselves as small, we also think of what we do as small. So if we do something good, it was a little whatever, it wasn't a big deal. And if we do something conversely wrong, it was not a big deal, whatever. I mean, God thinks I'm so holy, he knows me, it's okay. And neither is correct. Our good is far more important than we can fathom, and our wrongdoing is far more important than we can fathom. I'm not saying we're going to get a David or a Goliath, but for us, yeah, every choice has a consequence. And we never know which are these fundamentally critical choices that, create our destiny. So that was it. Orpah kissed her, he goes, and there goes Orpah. And there, for Naomi, it was almost like the final point of death of her son Chilion. Meaning, even though Naomi was pushing them, go, 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 still, yes, as long as these girls were by her, though of course there was pain, but there was also some sense of her sons, because these were their wives for the past 10 years. And they were childless. So there's no kids, it's only the wives. So when Orpah turned back, obviously it was painful for Arpa, but she was being normal. And obviously it was very painful for Naomi because that's the last trace of her son Chilion she'll ever have. But Ruth clung to her. She didn't say anything. I mean, she's soon going to say a lot. Very famous words. But at this first intense moment, she didn't even say anything. She just clung to her. And that was, in a sense, saying it all. I'm sticking with you no matter what. No matter what. No matter how crazy, no matter how irrational, no matter how many Moab princes are calling for my hand, no matter how unused I am to both of us. I mean, obviously, Bruce and I were both very unused to poverty and affliction and physical labor, but I'm sticking with you. I'm not going to give you up. I don't care how irrational it is. I'm not giving you up. And that, in essence, which is interesting, we see this from Rus, who is the convert, but that's in essence the life of the Jew. God, we are sticking to you. It's irrational. It makes no sense. We got engaged 3,332 some years ago, and we're still waiting. And we're crazy. What we're doing doesn't make sense, but we're not giving you up. Just as Ruth would not give up Naomi, would not give up God. That's us. Doesn't make sense. We're crazy. We can't talk. We can't articulate it because it doesn't make sense. But God, we're not giving you up. But then she starts talking. So she said, this is now Naomi telling Ruth, like, hello, look, your sister-in-law has returned her people and to her God. Go follow your sister-in-law. Which we said, again, only makes sense in understanding that Naomi didn't know if their conversion was real or not. If they were a real convert, you can't take a convert's a Jew, and say, go, serve idols, serve idols, serve idols. But because she wasn't sure, if Arpa turned back as Arpa did, that meant she was never Jewish these past 10 years. So she's going back to idolatry. She was always not committed to God. So, that's it. Maybe until now, Arpa felt like embarrassed, like, I'm going to abandon my mother-in-law. She's old. Life's so hard for her. She lost all her wealth. She lost her husband. She lost her kids. I want to throw her into the mud. Like, I can't do that. But Naomi made it very easy. When someone says to you, go, I don't want your help. I don't want your help. I don't want your help. I'm sure we've all had experiences where we feel bad for someone, we want to help them. And they say, don't give me any of your help. I don't need your sympathy. I don't need your pity party. I don't need your help. So you go. They don't want you. So Naomi was saying to them, go. I don't want you. I don't want you. So she made it very easy for Arpa to leave. But Ruth didn't go. But Ruth said, we're up to verse 16. Do not urge me to leave you, to turn back and not follow you. Wherever you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people are my people, and your God is my God. And then she continues the next verse. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus may God do to me and more, if anything but death separates me from you. Very, very powerful words. Obviously, she created them, but they've obviously become very, very classic words that resonate. There are many levels of commentary, but even looking at it in the most literal sense, she is expressing this absolute fidelity, this absolute loyalty to God and to Naomi. Now, there are many, many commentaries on these verses. I felt the words are powerful enough on their own that I didn't want to lose the power of the word by going into the commentary. There's some that explain that these are alluding to all the different laws she was accepting on herself. There's many different levels of meaning, but to me, the words resonate on their own. So verse 18, when she saw, now these are all pronouns, which is why we can sort of interpret this verse in two directions. It all says pronouns. When she saw she was determined to go with her, she stopped arguing with her. Now, obviously, simply, this means Naomi sees that Ruth is like, hey, where you die, I die. That's it. She stopped arguing. Okay, I did my part. I was being very observant of God's laws. I pushed her away once. I pushed her away twice. I pushed her away 3 times. And her response is, where you die, I die. She's sincere. She's genuine. I do not need to push her away anymore, which is true for converts. In other words, even though the process initially might sound harsh, push them away, push them away, push them away. Once they're pushed away 3 times and they don't reject God and they still come back and say, no, this is the real thing, I want this, then that's it. We're done testing them. We might not convert them that day. They might have to learn a lot. They might have to live it for a while. But the testing rejection period is done. Now we can embrace them and help them become full Jews. So when she saw she was that committed, she's like, okay, obviously she's sincere. Obviously Arpa was not, and retroactively has not been Jewish these past 10 years. And obviously Ruth was Jewish these past 10 years and is, as we see by her absolute sincerity and commitment now. Now, that is the normal way of understanding it. When she saw how strong Ruth was, some say the word used in Hebrew means a moral strength, a real fortitude, again, on all levels, to commit to being part of the Jewish people. And some say we can look at it opposite and say when Naomi perceived that Ruth was so strong, she stopped arguing with her, meaning she stopped like wondering what's going on herself with her own life. Here, God struck down her husband. God struck down both of her kids. Why? Well, her husband obviously abandoned his fellow Jews, abandoned his relatives, abandoned his extended family, and abandoned Israel. And she wasn't blamed because she's the wife. Well, why didn't she leave when he died? Well, she's the mother of these 2 sons. Obviously, she's going to stick with her kids. And they chose to stay there, abandoning Israel, marrying this woman that's questionable if they were allowed to marry them, marrying princesses and being stuck in Moab. And God struck them down. And when there was no more ties, she left. But still, she could have been wondering, what did God save me for? What am I needed in this world for? At this point, my life is over. Sometimes people feel that after their husbands pass away or after they lose a child. God forbid, here both. My life's over. I have no reason to continue living. I'm done. Take me away, God. I have no desire to be here. When she saw Ruth's determination, she had a thought. Maybe for this purpose, I'm still around. I thought, God, what did you do me a favor and save me for? I don't need life now. What do I have to live for? I don't have a husband to live for. I don't have children to live for. I have a very harsh life now, which I'm totally unused to. What did you save me for? What do I need it for? What am I still around for? But now I see a glimmer of light. Now I see that maybe you saved me because I have a mission. Because there's a very special woman that you want brought into your fold. And my mission is to be her guide, to be her escort, to bring her to live a complete life as part of the Jewish people. So seeing Ruth's determination gave her a new lease on her own life because it made her realize maybe this is why I'm still around. Now, I mean, I don't know if anyone here has, but I definitely have spoken to people that sort of have this feeling, especially I think of someone I know who was devoted her life years and years to taking care of her own mother. And when her mother passed away, she sort of felt, yeah, like, okay, God, take me too. What am I here for? I can think of other people also that have echoed that sentiment. So people do have that sometimes. All right, life is over. I've got no more reason to be around. No, there is a reason. You're still around. There's a purpose. There's a plan. There's something God still needs you to do. There's something you can still do and contribute. And when you find what that thing is, you realize, hey, maybe I am still supposed to be around. Maybe life is still good. Maybe I'm allowed to feel that life is good. Maybe I should continue living. So that's another alternative way of understanding what's meant by this verse. Okay, so we are up to verse 19. We're up to really like the last concept in this chapter, but I think we'll stop now. So we will do our little bit on the laws of Shabbos, of the Sabbath, before we end. Does anyone have any questions on anything we've said tonight? We went through a lot of very powerful ideas. Any questions on any of it? Okay. So we were talking about preparing for Shabbos. We spoke about when you're supposed to prepare for Shabbos. We spoke about what you're supposed to prepare for Shabbos. We spoke about the expenses of Shabbos. So continuing these ideas, it says actually, now I don't know if this is per se practical, but I think it definitely shows the significance of Shabbos. So that's why I'm including it. It says that we have to put shopping for Shabbos before even prayers or Torah study, which of course are two very, very important things. Because if a person would say, wait, first I'm supposed to pray, then I'm supposed to study, and then I'll shop for Shabbos. Another person would say, wait, by the time you finish praying and studying, it's going to be 2:30 in the afternoon. No store is going to be open for you to get your, your whatever, your wine or your challah or your fish the stores are going to be closed. Shabbos comes in an hour and a half later. Oh, true. So what am I supposed to do? How could I do anything before I daven and I learn? No, Shabbos shopping comes first. That's how important it is to properly prepare for the Shabbos. That if a person will wait till after he davened and studied and the stores wouldn't be open, it wouldn't be available, it'll be too late. He's not supposed to do that. He's supposed to first shop and then do the other very spiritual, holy, important things. And similarly, a person should, if needed, I'm here talking about a man who studies a lot of Torah, and that's his occupation. It keeps him quite busy. Say, wait, if you're studying all this Torah, you won't have time to properly prepare for the Sabbath, for Shabbos. Study less Torah. What do you mean study less Torah? Torah is life. Torah is everything. Torah is the best. It's life. It's everything. It's the best. But you have to minimize your Torah study if you need the time to get ready for Shabbos. So a person can look and say, well, this week it's okay, it's fine, and it's okay. You could nowadays, I don't know how long it takes us to daven, to pray, to study, and we can still go shopping. But the concept is very important because the concept shows us how important to God is making the Shabbos beautiful. That to go shopping for the challah, for the wine, or for the candies, or for the dessert, for anything to beautify that Shabbos table, that's going to supersede the davening and the learning. That's how much Hashem wants us to keep and honor and revere and make so beautiful the Shabbos. Any questions on that? Okay. Well, wow, we did it exactly on time. Pretty amazing. Thank you so much for joining. A lot of food for thought in these very powerful words of Rus. I hope everyone's enjoying it. I definitely am. And thank you so much for coming. See everyone next week. Have a great week.
Thank you, Cyril.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cyril.
Thank you, Mommy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Carla. Thank you. Thank you, Rena.